Well, thanks for joining us today. We're talking to Louis Toenjes with St Amant's Import-Export, a business in Kansas that's growing rapidly throughout the United States, as well as developing into markets in Central America, South America, and parts of Asia. We're talking with Louis Toenjes, the Director of Business Development on both the import and the export sides of the business. And I think you'll find it really interesting as we dig deep into some of the issues that go on both in running a business in an ultra-competitive marketplace, some of the challenges, both regulatory and otherwise, that come up, and the value of bringing really high-quality niche products that come with a unique story, and the value of having that unique story when going into a competitive marketplace like import and export. Thanks for taking the leap, Louis, and being here with us today. So tell us about yourself and about your business.
Sure, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
It's always a pleasure to come here to your office and talk. So Louis Toenjes, and my background, so I was in the military, of course, like you, in the Marine Corps, though, versus the Army.
I won't hold it against you.
So from there, I went to corporate America, and I still currently work for a large Fortune 100 company.
Sure.
And I am easing into the role that we're going to be talking about today, which is working for a company called St Amant. Mm-hmm. And it's a import-export business for alcohol.
Sure. And what exactly is the history behind St Amant, and how have you gotten involved in that business?
Mm-hmm. St Amant's been around for about 8 years. I've only been involved for about a year and a half. Mm-hmm. It started as a export business, okay, and for wine, fine wines from California, Oregon, Washington, primarily.
Okay.
There was a need in the Caribbean, Central America, South America markets for good quality American wines, and it's just hard to get into those markets.
Sure.
For a number of reasons, a lot of red tape. It's just a different speed of doing business down there. It takes a different set of skills.
Sure.
So the founder of the business, St Amant, is one of my brothers.
Okay. And
so he had this business going and was successful, but had a hard time getting traction. Business would be good in Brazil, and then it wouldn't be good in Brazil.
Sure.
1 month they would love, a certain kind of wine, and then they just wouldn't buy any more of it. And a lot had to do with the distribution down there, things like this. And so for a number of years, 6 years plus, lots of hard work, but hard getting the traction that was needed for a long-term successful business.
Sure. So the business is around for about 6 years, 6.5 years before you get involved. Mm-hmm. It's able to get into some of those markets down in Central and South America. And at that time, is it still just doing wine distribution the whole time?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Primarily. Now there starts to be some beer that comes in, some good American craft brews. As you know, there's plenty of them, especially here, right?
Sure.
In Colorado, there's lots. And so there was an attempt to get some of those exported. Mm-hmm. And to some different markets too. South Korea.
Okay.
We had some cider that started going to South Korea. And again, it was just hard getting, meaningful traction. So it'd be real good, and then it wouldn't be so good. Mm-hmm. And then the producers here in the United States are asking, what's going on? How come our product isn't selling? You told us there'd be a lot more volume, but it's hit or miss. What's going on? And and then the big competition would come in, and they would be able to drop their prices, and savvy consumers would say, oh, this one looks good also. I'm going to get this one. It's cheaper.
Sure.
So there was a lot of that going on, but it stayed in the wine realm primarily.
Okay.
Over that time.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So we hit that 6.5 year point, and why do you come into the business? What is your role in changing the company?
So my role is, I would call it refocusing.
Okay.
And of course, as you know, I have a business background, right? An MBA through Colorado State University, and part of me wanted to use that.
Sure.
That knowledge that I had gained. And I saw this as an opportunity to help, mm-hmm, and also an opportunity to I guess really, use what I had and for personal growth also, and to help my brother, and to do something that's actually very cool. I mean, corporate America can be cool, and sometimes it's not, right? And,
sure.
But if you're a wholesaler for alcohol, right, it's a lot more fun.
Sure.
So that was really why I got into it, but to help bring a certain skill set, but also to refocus. Okay, we've been doing this for 6 years. Mm-hmm. But we're not getting a lot of traction. What do we need to change? Mm-hmm. And so that's where I brought my set of skills to play here.
Okay. So what were your observations coming into a business? Because, I mean, getting a business off the ground is one thing, but every business starts to become limited at some stage. Maybe it's you can't hire enough people. Maybe it's distribution like you're describing. Mm-hmm. So what were your observations coming into the business about what was causing that kind of challenge about getting traction?
Sure. There were a few things. One of the, right off the top, so customer focused, mm-hmm. right? It's one of these things where, hey, let's build it and then the customer will come and find it and like it, right? Well, yep. It's a great product, right? These products are the best we can find, but how do you tell the consumer that? How do you tell the distributors what they actually have, right? And so there had to be more of a focus on the customer.
Sure.
Right. What does the customer want? What do they perceive with the brand, with these brands, right? Mm-hmm. Are those working? Are they not, right? And so it was really a lot of customer focus. Okay, that was number one. The second thing was really, I guess, getting business systems that worked.
Okay.
So there were business systems, and they should have worked in theory, but they were too complex. They were too cumbersome. They consumed time that was never really there for a small business, right?
Sure.
And so what happens? They're not used.
Yep.
We're not using them. Customers aren't using them. And so that was another focus, was to simplify things.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So when now talking about kind of simplifying things, having systems that exist but are overly complex, or the client's not using them, we're not using them, do you feel like this was an issue in which it was sort of the playbook was being rewritten every time, or that it wasn't really kind of a step A, step B so much as everything's circumstantial? How was that happening exactly? Because mm-hmm. I mean that problem can crop up in a ton of different ways.
Sure. Again, going back to the customer focus.
Sure.
So we are not in the Bahamas, right?
No.
We're not in Brazil, right? Well, not all the time. Not enough all the time, right?
Sure.
And so we're not in Mexico. We're not in Panama. And so we had these processes, these business tools, and we said, hey, we're sending you this inventory. Mm-hmm. We want you to track that inventory in our system, mm-hmm. and your depletions in our systems. But we don't really use these systems either because they're really complicated, but let's see if you guys will, and then help us out. Of course,
sure.
It's not going to happen, right?
Yep.
And so that was one of the biggest simplification processes right there. Say, okay, what do we actually need? Do we need all this data from the customer? And do we really want them to have Wi-Fi to go onto this online tool and fill it out? Or could we give them different options, right?
Sure.
So that was a big part of it. So we really focused on, okay, what do we need from the customer? Mm-hmm. What could they easily provide to us without spending too much time? Mm-hmm. And let's start there. And let's make something very simple, a very simple tool that they can use so that they're giving us what we need, mm-hmm. and we're not demanding a unrealistic amount of time and effort on their part.
Sure. Really trying to meet them where they are, as opposed to asking them to do it or jump through the hoops that you're putting out there for them.
Because guess what? They're not going to jump through the hoops.
Sure.
And then we're not going to get what we need. And so nobody's happy. And then we could call them every month and say, hey, we need these numbers. We need these numbers. Go into this impossible system and put them in, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not going to make for a good relationship or a smooth anything. And then ultimately, we need that data to make business decisions.
Sure.
If we don't have that from them, what's the point?
Sure. So what exactly has been kind of the change in implementation? What difference, if any, have you noticed in the last year and a half? So now we have data.
Sure. So now we can see where things are selling, where they're not selling. Mm-hmm. What markets should we be in? Where should we put our efforts? Where's the margin? Right? Where's the cash?
Sure.
Without cash flow, we don't have a great business, right? So where do we have to be? In which markets? Which ones need hand-holding, right? Which one provide the best margins for us? And then we can start making decisions, strategic decisions, based on the data we're receiving back from these markets. And so simplifying this, allowing the customer to give us what we need, has allowed us to consolidate this data and look at it and say, oh, this wine's not doing so great. This beer, why is it doing this, right? What is it about this time of year in this market that causes it to crash and not sell any, right? Or sell a lot? Can we leverage that? So.
Sure. So, I mean, I guess this kind of raises the question, right? You're talking about trying to differentiate something like alcohol, where, first of all, there's these huge players in the arena. There's really well-known brands. There's billions of dollars spent on marketing in this field. So, how does a distributor differentiate from 45 other shops coming into every bar or liquor store, or warehouse or kind of local distributor trying to get their attention? What do you bring to the table that's different?
So I like to say we don't sell anything people need, okay?
Sure.
And what that means is we don't have the Jack Daniels, right? Every bar needs Jack Daniels. We don't have that. We don't have the cheap red wine. Every restaurant needs a cheap red wine, right? We don't have that. So we have what nobody really needs in that sense.
Sure.
But what we provide are products. There's really 3 criteria for how we pick a product to bring to market.
Sure.
It has to be family owned.
Okay.
And preferably multi-generational.
Okay.
2, it has to be unique, right? It can't just be another random, wine, that it has to have something that's unique about it, the story, something. And then 3, it has to be quality. There has to be a certain threshold of quality.
Sure. And
so once we have those 3 criteria met, right, we'll find something like what's here on the table.
Okay.
Guler.
Okay.
Family owned, 500 years old. They've won Brewer of the Year in Germany. It tastes incredible. It's a craft. It's a family owned craft brew from Germany.
Okay.
From Bavaria, right? Franconia to be more specific. And so it's unique. It's as high quality as you can get, and it's 500 years of family ownership.
Sure. So it meets all of those criteria. And to the point of it being unique, and I guess maybe this is already hints at my next question, right? Is that what really differentiates? It's that you're not trying to compete on staples. You're trying to bring in the special items.
That's right. We're not trying to compete with Jack Daniels.
Sure.
We're not trying to compete with Budweiser.
Sure.
Right? That would be very difficult. I mean, the beverage space is already, hyper competitive. And so if you're going to get into that space, you better have something that's legit, and it better have a good story.
Sure.
And even then, it's tough. And which we're finding out, right? We're making progress, but it's not easy. There's a lot of attention, constant attention that's required.
Sure. So I mean, you keep kind of bringing up the story component here, and obviously Guler, 500 years old, family owned, award winning, and probably a brand that I know, at least before you told me about it, I had never heard of, and probably a lot of people watching this will have never heard of or tried. So not only how do you find these stories in the first place, but what makes that kind of a unique selling point? If I am that regional store or that that local hotspot that people go to, what makes me listen to your story in the first place, and how do you find these? So
we've recognized that there's a lot of options for consumers, especially in the beer segment. Sure. And what really sells is a story, a real story behind that beer. So it has to taste good, first of all, which it does. It's incredible, right? Can we try here? Yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea.
But I don't want to interrupt your flow, so I'm going to ask you to multitask.
We'll start with the Dunkel. Okay. So this is it's basically a lager, but it's a dark. It's made with roasted barley. So it's got a little bit of a roasted caramel taste to it.
Nice.
I'll fill yours. So what makes this so different, right? Why do we go into an establishment with this or go to a distributor? And cheers. And why will they buy this, let's say, or why will they want to distribute this? And a lot of it has to do with that story. Okay, the family owned. There's not a lot in that category. This is very much a niche market, right? There's not a whole lot in those categories.
Sure.
There are lots of German beers, but there's a reason why a lot of it doesn't sell.
Okay.
Right? And part of that reason is many of the German breweries have tweaked their formulas for the American palate.
Okay.
Meaning they're very sweet and they're not very good.
I say I know some craft brewers who might debate you about that, but okay.
No, the craft brewing in this country is awesome, right?
Sure.
It's amazing. But I'm talking about the big, the Budweisers, the Millers, and so these large German breweries that you often see here. I won't name any names, but they will often try to go that route of mass-produced beers, and some of them are okay, but they're not craft. They're not family owned. They don't have that unique flavor and character that this will.
Sure.
And so that there is a spot for that on a lot of shelves and in a lot of restaurants.
So do you feel like a lot of your competition is showing up, and the reason they're getting turned away is because they show up with something that they're calling a German beer or German craft beer, and people are drinking it and it tastes more like an American beer when you're going into all these different markets? Or do you feel like this is just such a standout, high-quality product that's not necessarily the case, that these truly are just differentiating themselves?
We've actually found it hard. The moment we call it it's a German beer, people go, ugh, okay. Right? It's very interesting. I think we're very spoiled with the craft brew that we have in this country. It's very good.
Sure.
But of course, it's different than German brews. So the fact that a lot of the German breweries have, let's say, the bigger ones, the ones we'll often find on the shelves here, it almost hurts our efforts.
Okay.
Because they associate that profile with this. And so until you sit them down and say, hey, let's try this beer, they're expecting something that's not quite as good.
Sure.
Once they try it, though, the eyes get big and they say, wow, okay, this is different. Let's talk. And so it's like you got to taste it to believe it. And so getting in front of those distributors can be challenging. But if you're persistent, which we are, and then we do, and then we get their business. So
sure. So where do you think St Amant is heading to? Right, you've had a year and a half to build up data to kind of start getting some analysis going. So what have you learned, and where do you think you're taking it?
So first of all, we're heading towards profit.
Okay.
So
that's always a good place to head towards.
And the reason we're heading towards profit is because instead of just being an exclusive exporter, which we still have the whole side of the business going, we are now importing.
Okay.
The margins on importing are much higher. Okay. And we're on our own turf.
Sure.
So we can be in the market a lot more active. So we're heading towards profit quickly. Last year was our best year ever. Okay. Okay. And this year is certainly going to be better than last year. And so one of the big changes for this year is we're bringing in a mezcal. Okay. From Durango, Mexico. It's called Apaluz. And so my brother and I were down there in Mexico last month and had a great time. And we're part of the process. We're carrying the cooked agave. We're chopping it with the axes. We're drinking the mezcal out of the still. I mean, this is as authentic as it gets, right? It's family owned. Started in 1862. And they said, we want to give you this business. What can you do for us in the United States? Okay. So that's high margin. Sure. Spirits are much higher margin than even beer. Shelf life is longer. Sure. There's a lot of benefits to the spirits world, and the mezcal is incredible. Right? It's so much better than most of the other products in that category that I've tried. Okay, this is an exceptional mezcal. Again, fits our business model. So that's really where we're headed, is more into the import market. We never thought, in the beginning when I started helping, that wasn't so much a consideration. Then we started crunching the numbers, and you're looking at the math, and you say, we got to have these kinds of margins. And it's very difficult to get to that point in a pure export scenario, just based on where we're exporting to. Sure. And so doing the import side of things, right? Much better margins. The business is going to have more money to reinvest into additional projects, and it will it'll just grow from there.
Sure. So I mean, I would guess that one of the things you enjoy about your business is that you get paid to drink.
Yes.
And that's
and meet really neat people.
Well, and that's sort of the question there. What is the most enjoyable thing about being in an import-export business?
So, of course, in this world, there's a lot of very interesting people, right? And there's a lot of really good alcohol to try, right? And so you combine that, and then the travel to exotic places to find these different products. And so I think, in my opinion, right, one of the best businesses to be in, right?
Sure.
And when times are good, people like to drink, right?
Sure.
When times are bad, people have to drink, right? So it's kind of it's a win-win.
Recession-proof business model, right there.
It is, and especially if you have a fine product, fairly priced. So this is about $3.50 in the market on the shelf to the end consumer. Okay. An equivalent is generally $5, $6, $7.
Sure.
Okay. Imported from Franconia, Germany, from a family brewery, and we have it on the shelf for $3.50. That's our business model, right? And so it's just a lot of fun. We can bring really good high-end products to consumers and not have them break the bank to actually have a fine, good quality, authentic product.
Sure.
And it's going to be the same with Mezcal. It's going to be very competitively priced. But of course, we got to be careful not to underprice it.
Sure.
And signal that it's not top shelf alcohol, right? So there is a little bit of a consideration there and a strategy in how you price this stuff. But
sure.
Yeah.
So what are the biggest difficulties in going through this type of business? Is it travel? Is it finding new lines of business? Is it developing new accounts? Where is the difficulty in an import-export business?
The difficulty is the distribution.
Sure.
Okay. Distributors are being hit from all sides every day, all day. Okay. So I don't blame them. And so then all of a sudden we come along and we say, hey, we've got these great products. They're the best.
Sure.
And they're like, sure. Right? We've heard this before.
Yeah.
And so that is very difficult. So let's say they drink it. They say, okay, we're going to go with this. And here's our estimates. This is great. We have a need for something like this. It fits perfectly into our lineup. And they get it on the shelf. And then they say, well, we can move a lot of this, but not nearly as much as we can of, another big brand.
Sure.
So the salespeople that work for these large distribution companies are incentivized, right, to sell. Of course, that's how they're feeding their families. And so they're selling what's most profitable. If they can sell a whole lot of Budweiser, they're going to sell a whole lot of Budweiser.
Sure.
And they may not push Guler, even though they like it and even though they know it's a great product. There's not necessarily a lot of incentive for them to push something like this. So that is the number one challenge, I say, is getting the ear of the distributor and then incentivizing the sales crew to actually sell it.
Sure.
And so what we're learning is that you got to have some boots on the ground. You've got to go knock on doors. You've got to go to these businesses that are selling the product and say, hey, here's some posters for you, right? Here's some knickknacks, right? Here's a promotion we're running, right? We put together a trip to the brewery in Germany to the top salesperson in one of the markets.
There you go.
And so we're trying different things. We're trying to incentivize, but that is the number one, I guess, choke point or difficulty that we have.
Sure. So not even getting the distributor's attention, but getting their team's attention.
Right. That's right. Because there are a lot of distributors. So once you start, making enough phone calls and talking to people, and you can find a distributor. It takes some work, but they're not that elusive.
Sure.
In the long run, it's really the once it's on the shelf. How do you push that, right? How do you direct? Somebody walks into the store and they say, Guler, right? What's that? You know, but they don't know. But hey, I recognize this brand. I've seen this on my mug at home that I bought in Germany, right? And they'll take that, but they won't give this a try.
Sure.
And that's where the sales team and the distributors really come
Sure.
become very helpful.
Well, and you have kind of an interesting challenge in your business in that you have to consider both kind of the business to consumer side of what you're doing and the business to business side, right? You work with these distributors, you work with these institutions, you don't necessarily sell directly to consumers, but at the end of the day, the consumer's demand is what's going to drive those institutions to do business with you. So you sort of have an interesting role where you have to really consider what does the company care about and what do their customers care about. Whereas, the majority of businesses, we just deal with other businesses or we just deal with consumers. We don't deal with both ends of that. So it's kind of an interesting spot to get stuck in.
You hit the nail on the head.
Oh.
And so in one instance, there was a large German restaurant in one of the markets, and we redid their menu for them. We redesigned their menu and we put Guler beer on it. We said, hey, we'll redesign your menu if you can just put it on the menu. Because they were like, we don't want to change our menu, blah, 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 people will see it. And we said, no, we'll change your menu for you. So we made them a very attractive menu and had some professional help and printed them up, brought them, and they were very excited.
Sure.
And now the featured beer is Guler. So
there you go. That's quite kind of the pitch there, because that is marketing straight through that institution directly to their customers.
And that is, like I said, you nailed it, because that is the problem, right? Is we can get the distribution, we can do all these things. And of course we have social media also, but getting it to that, we're not there talking to the end consumer.
Sure.
And that is a challenge, especially in overseas markets with our export. That is even more challenging than, let's say, importing to the U.S. And
sure,
it's just easier here. But when you ship something to Belize, and it's in a little corner store in Belize, right? It's hard to make that connection with the end consumer. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what difficulties do you see coming down the pipe, if any? What as you grow and expand into additional products and markets, do you see that there might be kind of a traction part 2 that you're going to have to deal with?
The more product we have, the more track record we have of moving that product, it actually becomes easier for us. We have our distribution channels established. So it was very hard with Guler. This was our first product, okay?
Sure.
And so it was all new. There was a lot of learning. There was a steep learning curve. With the mezcal, right? Part of why the Martinez family in Mexico said, we want to give you the exclusive rights to our product in the U.S. market, was because they saw what we had done with Guler beer. And so now we're taking the mezcal and we're going to the distributors that we already have, and we're saying, hey, check this out. You love the beer. This was authentic and excellent, but look what we're bringing you from Mexico now. And they say, wow, mezcal, right? It's double-digit growths every year for the last 5 years, and it's going to continue, right? It's a great alternative to tequila. And so they're excited to have a good mezcal in their lineup also. Sure. And they know who we are. They know that we're going to answer their phone calls and that we're going to fix problems if they happen, whatever it is. And so they're much more willing to take on additional products that we're importing. So it's really, this is kind of a critical part, time, I would say, for the business right now. And we need to execute well. And we need these alliances with the distributors and their sales folks.
Would you say it's sort of a bet the company moment to keep expanding in this direction?
Yes. Yep. This is prime time. So
no pressure.
No, not at all.
Fair enough. Yeah. So it's interesting because just something about the way you just explained that stuck out to me. It almost seems more like your business is it's almost like being a talent scout, or being an agent for a celebrity. I mean, obviously, beer is the star of the show at a lot of things, or mezcal is the star of the show at a lot of things. But I mean, it almost seems like you're more trying to do the work of finding a really high-end product, and then really trying to make sure that other people see it as the same.
Yes.
And that's not the way I would think about an import-export. I would think more in terms of the logistics or the shipping lanes, or it being a big inventory challenge. It doesn't seem like that's really what the focus or the challenge is. It seems like it's much more kind of back to what you were saying earlier. It really is the story, and how well you're able to tell it, and the stories you're able to find that you can go tell.
Yes, that's true. Now, there was a lot of experience.
Sure.
You know, on the export side, with all the different government agencies on both sides, right, of the water. But so that there was a lot of knowledge there. Now, had we just out of the blue said we're going to start importing beer, where do we start, right? What government agencies, what type of permitting, what, you know, all of these things, that would have been more challenging.
Sure.
Definitely with the Guler project, but considering we had that experience, that's why I guess it's not such a. That's why I didn't list it as the top challenge.
Sure.
But you're right. It's getting the product the recognition it deserves. That's tough. That can be very tough.
Sure.
For a number of reasons. But you're right. It's looking for allies who understand what they're, you know, what they have, and then be willing to have them willing to actually try it, and then have them go and be influencers, right? I mean, this is all part of it. But that's what we're finding is absolutely the hardest thing about it, because these are family businesses. These aren't big brands that people recognize.
Sure.
So that's the additional challenge, yeah.
So what would you say to somebody out there who thinks, I'm going to just jump into it and I'm going to open up an import or an export business or both? What I guess advice would you share with them, or what perspective would you share with them?
Well, I would say be persistent. Have your ducks in a row.
Sure.
Okay.
Can you define that?
Yeah, sure. So there are certain things on a label, for example. You can't just be like, hey, I'm gonna ship this things in, right? These aren't widgets from China, right? This is, you know, there's a specific requirements on the back of this bottle, and it lists it right here. You know, it says imported by St Amant Trade, Paxco, Kansas, right? Headquarters is. And so there's a lot of detail that has to go into getting it right. You could get a beer to the border and they say, it's not labeled right, sorry. Now guess what? You've spent a lot of money, a lot of time, and now you've got something that's ticking, like the time is ticking for when it needs to be drank, so it doesn't go stale, and it's stuck.
Sure.
Maybe in a big, you know, harbor somewhere, and it's hot and it's cooking the beer. And so I would say you need to know what you're doing.
Sure.
Okay. Gosh, what other advice? It's similar to any business, I would say, right? So you've got to plan well, right? Don't just bring it in and say, it's really good, here, right? Like maybe have some of these meetings first. We're going to bring this in. Will you meet with me once it's here? You know, this kind of thing. Or bring some samples back from the country first, right? There's, you got to plan this out.
Sure.
As General Mattis says, right? He says, planning is anticipatory decision making. Okay? So what decisions do you need to make in a business? And then back that up and start making those plans, okay? So that you're just planning for the future, essentially, right? So anyway, I would recommend that. Things will go wrong.
Sure.
Okay? So on this last batch of beer we brought in from Germany, we brought a small batch in. It was a smaller Connex full of beer, right? It's small, between quotes, right? It was a lot of beer. We bring it in, we get it into the market, and it sells much faster than we thought it would. It was right around, you know, Christmas time, this kind of thing. So poof, the inventory's gone. People are looking for it. It's not on the shelf. Bad thing to happen, right?
Sure.
So we're like, okay, come on, Guler family, let's get that next shipment going. We want to refrigerate it so it's nice and fresh when it gets to the United States. So we get it into this refrigerated Connex. It gets on the ship. It gets here. It gets to Kansas City, and they crack open the Connex to put it into the warehouse. And there's a dead mouse under. It's not even in the sealed package. It's underneath, right? And whoop, okay, stop, quarantine. You know, we got to put this on the shipping. It's from from Bavaria, a mouse from Bavaria, right, or something, because it was sealed. And so, what do?
Sure.
We need to get this stuff, out of that Connex, right? They're saying, oh my gosh. So they came in and said, okay, it's actually not that big of a deal, but it sounded really bad what they were saying the consequences were going to be. And they said, oh, okay, and they moved it and we got the product in there. I tell you that story, not to gross you out, but maybe not the best story, but I tell you that story because who would think that your shipment would be held up in Kansas City, comes all the way from Franconia, gets held up in Kansas City because of a dead mouse from the Black Forest or wherever, right? It's like, how does that happen? Right when you need it the most. You need that beer in the hands of the distributor. So don't assume things are going to go well. There's always going to be problems. There's always going to be things you can't really necessarily foresee. So plan well, and you'll be all right. And you got to have some fun with it, right? This is a fun segment of the market to be in.
I can imagine. Well, I mean, on the point of fun, I would like to thank you for coming on today, and thank you for bringing drinks.
Yeah, of course. Here. Cheers, Dan.
Taking the Leap is filmed in Longmont, Colorado. Produced by Jeff Zimmerman. Audio and visual by M3 Films. Taking the Leap is a program by My Wealth Planners, an independent, fee-only registered investment advisor.